It is so difficult to describe because that's the dream.
89. 7, 0, 3 numbers, 1 ballot, and the biggest name in women's tennis isn't attached to any of them. The world number 1, the reigning WTA Player of the Year, the woman who just broke the single-season prize money record, got 0% of the fan vote for her own sport's grass court season. Not second place. Not third. 0. Not even a line on the ballot. And the woman who actually lifted the Wimbledon trophy 12 days earlier? 7%. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how both of those things can be true at the same time and why neither number tells the whole story on its own. 2:47 in the afternoon. Center court. A locker room corridor most cameras never reach. A 21-year-old is sitting with her legs stretched out, socks pulled up, a towel over her shoulders, mouthing something to herself. Not a prayer. A countdown. 1 point at a time, she keeps repeating the same 4 words she'll say in every press conference this month, like a rosary for the nervous system. She grew up doing this same routine years earlier. Half a world away, ruffled socks, light-up shoes, chasing a tennis ball across a court in the Philippines with her brother and her grandfather after school, long before anyone outside that neighborhood knew her name. Nobody was filming her then. Everybody is now. Wimbledon, July 2026. Grass so green it looks painted on. The hush before a match on center court is its own sound, thousands of people trying to be quiet at once. Phones down, drinks paused mid-sip. In one chair, Iga Swiatek, defending champion, a 3-time Grand Slam winner who has barely lost on this surface in recent memory. In the other, a no. 29 seed nobody outside her own country expected to be here past the first week. This is not supposed to be close. It's about to become the loudest upset of the tournament. What happens over the next 84 minutes ends with a rankings jump, a nation glued to live streams at 3 in the morning, and 12 days later a vote so lopsided it makes the actual Wimbledon champion look like an afterthought. Here's how it happened, and here's what it actually means, because those turn out to be 2 very different questions. Hashtag the build rewind 5 weeks. Start in Birmingham, a rain-delayed week where matches were pushed back hour after hour and players sat in locker rooms watching the sky instead of their opponents. A 3-set final nobody outside the tennis world noticed her second career WTA 125 title. Ground out point by point against a resilient Nikola Bartonkova. Then Berlin, a WTA 500 semifinal. Quietly building. The kind of run that earns a line in a recap article but not a headline. Then Wimbledon. Seeded 29th, which on paper meant a tough draw and low expectations. First round survived. Second round survived. And then history. Reportedly the first Filipino player to reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles main draw in the Open era, a sentence that had, by most accounts, never existed before this summer, for any player from that country. And then the moment that changes everything. Third round. Center court. And she doesn't just beat the defending champion, she takes the first set in a tiebreak that stretches all the way to 9, saving point after point under the kind of pressure that ends careers of lesser competitors, and closes it out 7-6, 6-2. 10 wins, 3 losses, that's her entire grass season compressed into one line. A career high ranking around No. 28, up from outside the top 30 just weeks earlier. She dropped to the grass and cried afterward, not from relief, she'd later explain, but because she understood exactly what this meant back home, for every kid who grew up the way she did, in front of a television that rarely showed anyone who looked like them holding a trophy. That's the peak. Remember it. Because the very next match is where the story turns, and where it gets more interesting than a simple underdog tale. Hashtag the loss that grew her round of 16. Jasmine Paolini, the 2024 finalist, across the net a player who knows exactly how to close out big matches on this surface. 3 sets. Eala doesn't collapse, she competes to the final point, saves break points, forces the match into a decider, but Paolini's precision at net is simply too clean on this particular afternoon. Too efficient to be denied. The door that was 3 wins from a Grand Slam final closes quietly. Without controversy. Without excuse. No bad line calls. No injury. No meltdown. Just a better player on that day. She walks off center court having gone further than any Filipino in tennis history, and she still looks like someone who lost something enormous. Here's the part worth sitting with. That loss didn't shrink the story. It grew it. Because 10 days later, instead of disappearing from view the way beaten quarterfinalists often do, she's in Manila, a homecoming, a meet and greet with fans who couldn't afford the flight to London, a reception at the presidential palace where the president tells her, in front of cameras, that she's shown the country's best qualities. 2 days after that, the WTA opens the Star of the Swing fan vote for the entire grass court season, and the result isn't close. Reportedly, around 89% goes to a woman who didn't even win the tournament that mattered most. Roughly 7% goes to Linda Noskova, the actual Wimbledon champion, who beat Karolina Muchova in an all-Czech final 12 days earlier. 6-2, 5-7, 6-3, her first career Grand Slam title. About 4% goes to Muchova herself, the runner-up who fought back from a set down to force a decider. Compare that to February, because context is what makes this land. Elena Rybakina reportedly won her fan vote for the Australian swing with around 61% after she actually won the Australian Open. A slam trophy was worth roughly 61% of the fan vote in February. 5 months later, on a different surface, a slam trophy was worth 7. Something shifted in how fans were assigning value. And it wasn't just about tennis anymore. Note, these figures are drawn from tournament and WTA reporting around the events worth double-checking against the WTA's own release before you repeat them as gospel. Because a number like this is exactly the kind of thing that gets rounded and re-rounded until it drifts from the original. Hashtag giving Sabalenka her due so. Where does that leave the best player in the world, the one with 0% and not even a line on the ballot? Let's not rush past her, because she deserves more than a supporting role in someone else's highlight reel. Aryna Sabalenka is not a footnote in this sport. Full stop. Year-end world number 1. Back-to-back seasons. 2025 WTA Player of the Year, voted on by a media panel with something close to 80% approval, a panel of people who watch every match, not just the highlights. The single-season prize money record reportedly over $15 million. More than any woman has ever earned on tour in 1 year. She has been, by a wide margin, the most consistent, most dominant player in this sport for 2 straight years. That's not spin. That's the scoreboard. And the scoreboard doesn't lie just because a fan vote looks dramatic. Here's what actually happened at Wimbledon 2026. A 4th-round exit to Naomi Osaka. A match that could have gone either way, against a former champion who has beaten far better players than that on far bigger stages. Reportedly booed as she left center court, which, if true, says as much about a crowd having a bad night as it does about her. And a raw, unfiltered post-match comment about wanting to get away from tennis. At least for a while, the kind of honest exhaustion that almost every top athlete feels at some point in a long season, but that only becomes a headline when the person saying it is expected to be invincible. Yes, there's a pattern worth naming honestly. Comments about Coco Gauff the year before that were widely read as dismissive. Comments she later apologized for in writing, calling her own words unprofessional. A heated outburst directed at a heckler during a loss in Rome. These are real, and pretending they didn't happen would be its own kind of dishonesty. But it's also worth saying plainly, an athlete owning a mistake in writing, in public, is not the same as an athlete who doesn't grow. 18 months of imperfect moments from someone playing under constant scrutiny is a very different story than 18 months of someone refusing to be accountable, and the record shows she has been accountable, publicly, more than once. So let's be precise instead of dramatic. This isn't a performance gap. It's a popularity gap, measured on a single afternoon, by a voting mechanism that rewards reach and mobilization as much as it rewards excellence. Those are 2 different questions, and on July 17th, the WTA's own ballot made it look like they were the same question. They aren't. She is still, by every result that shows up in a rankings table, the best player alive right now. Hashtag the twist. Here's the part worth saying plainly. The loss to Paolini should have ended this story. A quarterfinal exit usually fades from memory within a week. Instead, it's the reason the story is bigger than tennis at all. Because a runner-up doesn't usually get a landslide. A player who fell short of the final doesn't usually outpoll the actual champion by more than 80 percentage points. Unless the vote was never really about that one match to begin with. It was about who people wanted to watch, win or lose, week after week, and a nation that had been waiting a year and a half to be taken seriously by a sport that barely acknowledged it finally had a reason to show up in numbers nobody could ignore. A former app top 25 pro turned commentator, Steve Johnson, has reportedly said publicly that Eala is a bigger draw right now than either Coco Gauff or Sabalenka. That's one man's opinion. And it should be treated as exactly that, an opinion, not a verdict. But it's an opinion coming from inside the locker room, with a direct line to both tours, which at least makes it worth taking seriously rather than dismissing outright. The math behind the underlying claim is fairly simple once you look at it. The Philippines, roughly 117 million people, plus a global diaspora estimated at another 10 to 15 million, spread across the Middle East, North America, and Europe, among the most digitally engaged populations anywhere on Earth. The Czech Republic, home of the actual Wimbledon champion, roughly 10 million people total, a fraction of that reach. That's not a flaw in the voting system, and it's not evidence that the vote is meaningless either. It's the voting system finally reflecting where a massive, mobilized audience already lives. Tournament directors know this. Sponsors know this too. And sponsors move fast when they see a market this size light up overnight. For roughly 40 years, the financial center of gravity in women's tennis sat almost entirely in Western Europe and the United States. A ballot on a random Friday in July quietly suggested that gravity is starting to move somewhere else, not that it has moved, but that it's starting to. This is bigger than one scoreboard, and it's bigger than one sport. This is what it feels like to grow up somewhere the sport barely notices, cheering for players who never looked back, and then watch a whole country decide, together, at 3 in the morning, refreshing a vote on borrowed data, that they were done being ignored. Hashtag what comes next, she is not finished. Not close. The North American hardcourt swing is next Washington, then Toronto, then Cincinnati, then the US Open. The exact same stretch where Sabalenka is defending enormous ranking points from last season. If their draws cross even once in the next 6 weeks, it will likely be the most watched match of the entire summer, not purely because of seeding or ranking, but because of what happened on a ballot in July that neither of them can fully undo with one result. A deep run in New York, a quarterfinal or better, would put her inside the world's top 20 for the first time in her career. A signature win over a top 5 player specifically on hardcourt, something she still hasn't managed to do, would go a long way toward answering the fair question still hanging over this whole run. Was grass a genuine turning point? Or a perfect surface meeting a perfect month? Both things can be partly true. And if she keeps anything close to this trajectory over the next 12 months, this time next year the conversation almost certainly won't be about a fan vote at all. It will be about whether she can go one round further at a major and reach an actual Grand Slam final, which is the only number that will ultimately settle the argument this whole story is built on. The best player in the world and the most loved player in the world used to be the same sentence, more or less, for as long as most fans can remember. On July 17, 2026, they stopped being the same sentence, cleanly and publicly, on a ballot with both their names on it, or, in Sabalenka's case, conspicuously without hers. Nobody, not the WTA, not Sabalenka, not Eala herself, has figured out yet whether that split is temporary or permanent. 89, 7, 0. Remember those 3 numbers, and remember what they actually measure, not who's better, but who people were paying attention to on one specific week in July. Here's the actual question worth arguing about. Not just a vague one. If Sabalenka wins Cincinnati next month, and Eala goes out early in the same event, does the fan vote flip back, or has attention in this sport permanently decoupled from results? I'd genuinely bet on the second one, and here's why. Attention compounds in a way that a single tournament result doesn't undo. But I could be wrong, and the next 6 weeks will actually tell us. Drop your prediction in the comments before Cincinnati starts, not after, when it's easy to be right. In a few years, when everyone knows this name, you'll want a record of when you knew first.